In this section, we would understand French Revolution and the role of Napoleon Bonaparte. So let's begin with this layout that we would understand. So we would talk about the three states, the clergy, the nobility and the common people, and the three philosophers whose ideology liberalized the thought process, the fall of the Bastille fort, followed by the Declaration of Rights of Man, the period of Napoleon Bonaparte that ended with the Battle of Waterloo. Now, important to note, in American Revolution, we talked about Declaration of Independence, which was signed in 1776. Here it is Declaration of Rights of Man. So, a minor difference that we need to understand. To begin with, the French Revolution. Now, French Revolution, as we said, started in the region of France, of course, and this was a period from 1789 to 1795. Much later than the American Revolution. So we can say French Revolution was inspired by American Revolution. Three estates in which the French society was divided was the first estate, which was known as clergy, the second estate, which was nobility, and these were absolute landlords, and the third were the common people. Now, common people was also known as the middle class or bourgeoisie, and these were the people who were merchants, peasants, artisans, lawyers, doctors, teachers. So everyone who was working was part of the common man. Now, what was so unique about this structure that existed in France? The first two classes, the clergy and the nobility, enjoyed a luxurious life. They owned land. They did not pay any taxes. So no taxes that has to be paid by clergy and nobility. However, all the taxes were to be borne by the common people, and this common people suffered the most miseries and the hardships. Even King Louis XVI, so Louis XVI, who was the king during that time, it is believed that he lived a luxurious life and paid no heed to the miseries, the hardships of the common people. And there were no checks on the powers of the rulers, and therefore a resentment rose among the common people. So there was a major cause, this was one of the major cause of resentment among the common people. Now, three important philosophers, as we said, these three philosophers, Rousseau, Voltaire and Montesquieu, also influenced the ideologies in American Revolution. Here also they liberalized the thought. So they propounded three important concepts. The first was the concept of liberty, the second was the concept of equality, and the third was the concept of fraternity. Liberty, equality and fraternity were the three concepts that were laid down, and they strongly attacked the ideas laid down by church, by the nobility, the first estate. They fought for the rights of the common people and asked for justice to common people. So Rousseau among these had been very important because he said that subjects, the common people, have the right to throw the king who do not work in accordance to the common people, and therefore he said that middle class is an economic clout, and also they do not have the social and political mobility, so they should be allowed even the social and political mobility in order to rebel against the ancient regimes that have been laid down through the generations. So war started to rise within the common people. There were resentment among the common people, and also the French rulers, since they were constantly engaged with wars, they were draining out the resources of the empire, and these resources of the empire were paid only by the common people who were giving the taxes. So the common people were now forced to pay much more taxes, which strengthened the ideas of rebellion among the common people. So common people who already had to pay tax were not happy with the government. With state constantly moving into more wars, They were asking for more taxes, and this further brought a resentment for the common people. Now, what happened was an interesting episode, and this was in 1789. So, similar to the Boston Tea Party in American Revolution witnessed in 1773, here was the fall of Bastille Fort. Now what happened here? The people of Paris, they moved into the prison and freed all the people of the prison, and the monarchy at that time was overthrown. This became the symbol of liberation for France, and therefore, this event, which happened again in July, so in America, the Declaration of Independence was on 4th July. Here it is 14th July. So in France, 14th July is celebrated as a national holiday. This was a symbol of liberation of the common people of France with the liberation of the prisoners. Now what happened in line with this? In line with this, the King Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette was first imprisoned and later on put to death in 1793. Now when King Louis and his wife were put to death, there was a huge chaos in the kingdom, and Jacobins came to power. Jacobins started to create terror, and from 1793 to 94, the people were executed, the nobles, the clergies were executed at a huge pace, and there was a huge terror under the reign of Jacobins. So after Louis XVI was the period of Jacobins, and this was witnessed for nearly a year. But during this time, in 1795, the National Assembly of France, the National Assembly of France adopted Declaration of Rights of Men. As you can see, the three words which have been crafted, those are liberty, equality and fraternity. That means liberty, equality and fraternity. So this new constitution that was adopted by France focused on the ideas, the three pillars of liberty, equality and fraternity. With this, France came into existence, new democratic thoughts, new ideas were brought, and the supreme power of the king that was so far witnessed in France was abolished, was ended. The nobles, the church lost their properties, lost their lands, and all the lands that was with the nobles, with the churches, was redistributed to common people. Also, the slaves who were there in the French colonies were set free. So no more slavery was witnessed, and a common feeling among the people, a feeling of nationalism started to rise. People started to protect their rights, protect their privileges, and this not only inspired the regions in Europe, but also the colonies which were there in America, which were there in Asia, in Africa, to move against the imperial powers. And even Indian constitution now has these three ideas which were laid down under the French constitution and the French Declaration of Rights of Man. Those are the liberty, equality and fraternity witnessed even in the constitution of India. After this declaration, the Declaration of Rights of Man in 1795, there was the Napoleon Bonaparte's era that started. Now, Napoleon Bonaparte's works have been interesting. He belonged to Corsia family, and he was basically from Italy. He was very, very strong, very, very ambitious, and his wife was Josephine. Josephine was a widow of a noble and mother of 3 children. Now, Napoleon Bonaparte basically started his ideas as a directorate. So he became a directorate in 1799, and under him there was a consulate formed in France, and there were 3 consuls that worked under him. He became first consul and later on the later consul for his life in 1802, and thereafter he was he became the Emperor of France in 1804, and in 1804 there was the coronation ceremony for Napoleon Bonaparte, which was witnessed. His life's the most golden years of Napoleon Bonaparte have been quoted from 1809 to 1810, and this was the 1808 nearly. 3 years of his life were the most glorious period from 1808 to 1810, and during this time he witnessed numerous military and political supremacies. He defeated Australians in Italy. He also threw away Russians from France and defeated Britain, the people of Britain, and therefore his era has been marked very important. He played an important role in establishing small republics in Germany, in Italy, and even in Belgium. So three of the regions where he established small republics have been important. And then there was the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. Now, Battle of Waterloo was the battle where Napoleon was finally defeated and sent to exile. He was exiled to St. Helena Island, and at St. Helena Island in 1821 he finally died. The Battle of Waterloo is an important part in history. So there was on one side the Napoleon's army under the French commander, and on the other side there was the 7th coalition by the British-led coalition, and this was by the Duke of Wellington. So Duke of Wellington under the 7th coalition as one of the sides, and Napoleon Bonaparte, the French army on the other side, had a serious battle at Waterloo. However, Napoleon Bonaparte was defeated in the Battle of Waterloo and was exiled to St. Helena Island, where he finally died in 1821, and this brought the end of the Napoleon Bonaparte's rule. So a quick recap of what we have understood in this French Revolution. So to begin with, we talked about the three estates: the clergy, the nobility, who had the land, who had to pay no taxes. On the other hand, the common people like the doctors, lawyers, peasants, artisans had to pay the taxes, had to have the economic burden, but at the same time were not given the political and the social mobility. So there were three philosophers who came into existence: Voltaire, Rousseau and Montesquieu, and these propounded the three ideas. The three ideas were the ideas of liberty, equality and fraternity under the Declaration of Rights of Man. The fall of Bastille Fort was witnessed, and this was again an important development similar to the Boston Tea Party in American Revolution. And finally was, after this French Revolution ended in 1795, the period of Napoleon Bonaparte started. Napoleon Bonaparte came into power and was finally defeated at the Battle of Waterloo, where he was exiled to St. Helena, and he died in 1821. So that was a quick summary about the French Revolution that we have understood, and how nationalism rose to power. This nationalism awakened the colonies in Asia and Africa to move against the imperial powers.